So, how much should I lie to you? It's a very clickbaity title, but bear with me. I think it's a very important question for me to ask, given that recording guitars and amplifiers and then playing them back is a very artificial construct, and one we are all used to, many of us in ways that we're not aware of, because when you record a guitar, say for an album traditionally, aside from all the manipulation that goes into creating the sound with hitting tape harder or EQing, either for an effect or to get sometimes just a more natural sound than the microphone itself picks up, between that and the fact that if I play a clean guitar and then a distorted guitar on playback, they're often mixed to be very similar in levels, even if in the room they were wildly different. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of artificial representation on playback. I want you to know what an amplifier sounds like. And so while if you watch most YouTube videos or listen to most albums, the cleans and the dirties are about the same level. The dirties may be a little bit louder. It's, it's all to taste and what you want to jump out. But, if you watch a channel, say Paul David's or Chris Buck. These are all very good players, and they're usually presenting musical information, and they're not worried about whether it's artificial or not. And so their cleans will be the same level as their distortions, whether they're using amplifiers or Kempers or Helix or whatever. I don't know how much I should do that, because I want you to know what an amplifier sounds like. Let me give you an example of the problem. If I were to play this AC30 clean, and then dirty with the master volume down, the relative levels are the same. But if I do the same thing again without the master volumes, so you hear how much louder the amp gets when it's distorted, there's a huge level issue. And I'll show you why that's important. Now, as you can hear, the distorted stuff is a lot louder than the clean stuff. And there are ranges in the amplifier where it's not going to be the case. And, if this video were about this amp, I'd show that a little bit more, where beyond a certain point, it doesn't get a lot louder, it just gets more saturated. But in an amp video where you have accurate representations of the level change from quieter to louder, then you can track that. You'll hear that, it's much quieter in this clean range, and all of a sudden it starts to break up and overdrive and gets to a certain volume level, and beyond that it doesn't get a lot louder. Whereas if I do the traditional thing where I mix it all so the peaks are about the same point, or I can do some compression so the average of the waveform is about the same, then you hear something that doesn't tell you where the volume change is when at the onset of overdrive and beyond. You don't have that information. You don't have the information of this is what it sounds like clean, but it's a lot louder when it's dirty. On a modern amp, of course, you have channel masters and all that. You can do that. But on a vintage amp or an amp like this AC30, which is emulating a vintage amp, it gets, you cannot change to the overdrive setting with the master. It's all a manual thing. It's all set and forget. I digress. So I want you to know all these things, but when I put that into a video form, it can be very difficult, because if I set the levels so that the dirty stuff is just below clipping digitally, that means the clean stuff is going to be a lot quieter. And so you tune into the channel, you hear an amp, and It's really quiet compared to other YouTube videos. You may think, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. You switch to another channel, there you have those big loud cleans. Well, what most guys do is on the clean stuff, they raise the faders, so to speak. They play back the clean stuff louder, and they turn down the output on the dirty stuff, and all averages out. And given that I need to speak to you, to narrate a lot of the things, to give you verbal information, if I set it so that my voice on playback is consistent with the level of the dirty stuff, well then my voice is going to be really a lot louder than the clean stuff. Or if I set my voice to be in between, then my voice is going to be louder than the clean and the overdrive stuff is going to drown me out. Or if I set my voice to be the level of the clean, then the overdrive stuff just comes out of nowhere because someone will invariably turn their speakers up if I'm playing, quiet guitar. If this is what you hear on playback, and I'm talking and everything is kind of quiet, and then you get, well, someone just got the shock of their life through their headphones or whatever. So I try to be aware of that. The other issue is, this is an SM57, about 6 inches away from a speaker. This captures a part of what the amp sounds like. This SM57 is going into a Line 6 UX2. It's a really cheap USB mic pre. I'm about to replace it with something better. That said, that something better is not going to be a Neve or API going into really high-end converters or anything. I just don't have the budget for it. So any recording I do, and that could be an E609, it could be a U87, it's only going to give a partial picture of what the amp sounds like. So I'm trying to find the balance between, pardon me, lying to you or being so honest that things sound bad. So I might decide that, well, for whatever reason, it just sounds a little bit boxier on playback than it did in the room. Let me do a 1 dB dip around 300 hertz. Okay, that's what it sounds like in the room. So I trust myself, both in my experience and knowledge and my motive, to do things like that, where it's not really lying, it's just making what the mic picks up sound more like what's in the room. That said, if an amp comes in and like this one does not have reverb, I'm not adding reverb to it. I'm not even adding a little bit of ambience, which everyone is used to hearing. People don't very often listen to dry guitar recordings. I could do a room mic to mix with the close mic, but this room doesn't sound good for that. I wouldn't have any control over it. I'd have phase issues and certain frequencies would have resonances that aren't real. So the close mic is the way to do it most accurately. But then it sounds very dry, and people are not used to that. People are used to hearing things with some EQ, some compression, a little ambience added. So for shits and giggles, I'm going to do that. Make this a little less bright. This is a bright guitar. I'm going to play something really basic and clean, and then play the same thing back with the typical effects that you would find on most recordings. That sounds pretty good. Now hear the same thing with the typical processing, just to make it sound its best in this format, which is how most people get this information to them. And then if we play the original back, it sounds pretty boring in comparison. So I need to find certain limits on how I present things. Maybe that rather than, unless I'm specifically showing a dynamic part of an video playback in terms of where the transition is, maybe I'll agree that I will bring the cleans up a little bit so that the distortion doesn't jump way the hell up. And then I'll disclose that. Maybe I'll say, okay, yeah, that mic is just a little bit boxy compared to what it sounds like in the room. I'll do a slight notch around 300 hertz. And then instead of saying no EQ is applied, I'll say the slightest possible EQ is applied. Maybe some amps need a little bit of room ambience. Maybe they don't. I want your feedback on these things. It's a process. I'm trying to find the best way to present the information to you while making it an enjoyable listening experience without going down the rabbit hole of flat out sugarcoating everything. You know, I could put all kind of studio fairy dust on this, and then every amp will sound the same, every guitar will sound the same. Might as well use a pod, right?